Hello, my little wine introverts. This is Introvert Wine Podcast by Xenia, and we're still speaking about wine one episode at a time. So today's episode is called A Perfect Sommelier, and I want to make a disclaimer right in the beginning that I am not a sommelier. I do not call myself a sommelier because for me, a sommelier, the definition of the profession, is somebody who's working on the floor full time in a restaurant. But I am very closely connected to the profession. I have some experience. I participated in sommelier competitions, and now I work very closely with ASI on organizing and hosting different competitions and events for sommeliers. But I always wanted to understand what makes one sommelier better in the profession, what helps them to stand out or be more successful in the exams and competitions as well. And so, as I have less experience, I wanted to talk about it with somebody who has quite a meaningful career in this area. And there is no better person than Marc Almert to speak about sommelier and sommelier profession because he is ASI's Best Sommelier of the World from 2019. He has won the competition at the age of 27 and, of course, has not stopped in learning about wine. And we spoke with Marc about, well, first of all, his career, his path, his interest in wine, and also about the definition of a perfect sommelier and what is more important about the qualities, the personal qualities that make one sommelier stand out against others and what make them more successful, the soft skill set, and also Marc's experience in preparation for competitions for different sommelier contests. And also, I could not miss the opportunity to go to Zurich to visit Marc and not taste the Swiss wines, which was very enlightening because even being a wine professional, I feel that there is a lot of stereotypes about the Swiss wines, and I hope we did break some of them, and I really hope you enjoy this episode. So, Marc, can you please tell us how did your wine path start? What brought you into wine initially?
I noticed I like some wines, but not all wines, and liked to get to know why and why did some mature so well. And I was lucky I had a great boss who took us along to some tastings, to some harvests in the Ahr Valley, Pinot. Steep place to do the first harvest. And then I thought, wine is a great hobby. I'll be a hotel manager. And started working towards hotel management. Moved around Germany for different work experiences, and during that noticed that actually wine is my real passion. And then decided it would be great to settle in a wine region. So I settled in Wiesbaden, part of the Rheingau area, so Riesling, and had a great chef sommelier who really taught me the tricks of the trade, and who, against my will, forced me to go to some sommelier competitions.
So it was not your choice to participate. No. I guess it's nobody's first choice to really torture yourself. But,
And he also enlisted me for the CMS exams because he was doing certified at the time. He said, look, you're doing a great job, but you need some kind of certificates. So I started training for those, also whilst doing competitions. And on my first young sommelier competition from the Stereotypes, I came second. And they told me, if you would have won this year, the international final is in Copenhagen. If you take part again next year and you win again, the international final is in Adelaide. Like, I'm 22, working as a waiter, trip to Australia, that sounds fun. So I learned a lot. I moved to Hamburg in the meantime, where I was working in a large hotel with very different restaurants. The Vierjahreszeiten, which translates to 4 seasons, but it's unrelated to the chain. And took part again in the Young Sommelier competition and won the ticket to Adelaide. And I was like, this is an interesting thing, these sommelier competitions. Because on that competition were candidates like Heidi Mäkinen, a young Finnish lady at the time, Mia van der Water, who later became the head sommelier of 11 Medicine Park and is on the board of the CMS now. And of course, Heidi passed to MW shortly after that. And they were doing things like, when we had a break, they were learning flashcards on their phone. I was like, I didn't even know programs like that exist. And I did very badly in that competition because I was really out of my comfort zone. But I had kind of gotten the bug for it, and I kept then doing more competitions and more trainings for the exams. And after 3 years in Hamburg, whilst doing all of that, shortly after passing my advanced sommelier exam, I decided I want to see a different wine market and improve my French. So I was looking for a job in Paris or in Western Switzerland. And somebody told me that the Bourlac in Zurich is looking for sommelier. And the general manager at the time was the general manager under which I had done my job training in Cologne. So I called him and said, "You're looking for a sommelier, but to be honest, I'm looking for something where I can learn French." And he was like, "Well, give us a try. We have a lot of French people on the team." And I came here and met all of the head chefs, which are all either from the French-speaking part of Switzerland or from France. And I met Aurélien Blanc, who was the previous sommelier, now restaurant manager, who was also training for competitions at the time and is originally from Burgundy. I thought, maybe I give it a shot because they have a nice wine shop, they have a nice wine cellar, nice place, Zurich, very central in the European vineyards, like Burgundy is 3 hours drive, for example. And that was 7.5 years ago. And since then, I've been working here. Did some competitions with which I finished in 2019, which is, I think, shortly before we met in the big ASI family.
It was my first sommelier competition that I watched online, and I was so impressed. Then I actually started competing myself. So I hold you responsible for that.
Sorry about that. And and since then I've been doing different positions here in the house, from sommelier to helping with events, but now also partially in charge for the wine shops and wine distribution and bottling company we have. I'm not competing anymore. Still trying to learn about wine, still trying to teach about wine. I teach in some sommelier schools or with you and Zurich and the likes at the ASI bootcamp. But yeah, in a different perspective. I do miss it sometimes, but other things are fun too.
Yeah. I wanted to call this episode The Perfect Sommelier, as a reference to you in some way, but also to speak about what makes a sommelier, great or winning or really stand out. So before we're going to dig into the details, how would you define for yourself what is a perfect sommelier for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for the flowers, as we say in German. I would strongly disagree because at the moment I'm not working that much more on the floor. And I think a traditional sommelier, to my understanding, works in a restaurant environment. I'm still attached to the restaurants of the Bourlac and still write the wine list and train the team, but I don't do 5 services a week because of the wine shops. I don't think there is a perfect sommelier because I think as a great sommelier, you keep challenging yourself and you keep improving. And I think as long as you're seeking perfection, you can't have it yet. And once you stop seeking it, you become too large-headed. I think there are a couple of great examples that we have or had in our industry. What to me were idols I was trying to be like still working on the floor, Serge Dupes, for example, after 50 years, and very, very humble. I sadly never knew him close, but everybody I speak to about Gérard Basset, to me, probably is up there. And actually, that was a task on the World Championship in 2019. They made us write an essay in the semi-final about how would you define a great sommelier and what characteristics do they need. And I wrote my essay on Gérard. And I think from everything I've heard about him, from his family and others, he to me would become very close to the definition. But I think he himself would also disagree that he would or was a perfect sommelier. And I think a couple of key features a great sommelier or sommelier should have. One of them is curiosity, to me, because I know so many somms that say, I don't like Pinot Grigio or all natural wines are bad. But I think as a sommelier, you should always be interested to find the one that you like or the one that fits your quality perspective and not categorize anything categorically and say no. I also think humility is super important because I often describe our role as that of an ambassador because a chef creates a dish, a bartender creates a cocktail. I, as a sommelier, I don't really create anything. Maybe a moment because I help being part of the service team.
But the wine is already also produced and bottled for you.
So I see my role both in the team but also with the guest as I need to listen to the vintners, what their philosophy is, what the specialty of the region or the vineyard or the vintage is. I need to listen to our chef, what kind of dish she wants to make or why. And then I need to listen to my guest, what possible combination of dish, moment and wine could fit for this guest in this moment. The same guest might have a different approach coming in for business dinner or coming for his wedding day. And I think that's why I see us like this intermediary. And with that, to me, also goes, as a somm, you never work alone. You either work in a team of somms, if you're lucky. In the German-speaking world, we're usually not that lucky. In a big property, if at most you're 2 or 3 somms, usually in the restaurant itself, you're on your own. So you work very closely with the rest of the waiting staff. You, of course, work closely with the kitchen. You work closely with the stewards, making sure we have great glassware. You're part of a team, and also you could extend that team thought to other suppliers that bring you the wine.
Yeah,
and I think
the extended or the bigger team it can be called.
And to me, those like curiosity, humility, and taking yourself back and being disciplined about it, because sometimes it's also hard work when you learn a lot and work a lot. But I think that to me are some key features that could help you become closer to being a perfect sommelier.
It is interesting because when people speak about sommelier, they put so much focus on the knowledge, on the technical knowledge about the wines, the regions, the appellations that you need to know, the the appellations of Brazil or Serbia, or different beverages outside of wine as well. And I don't feel that enough attention is paid to the qualities that distinguish some sommeliers that we put out as great or not perfect, but almost there, versus others who might not be as successful in competitions, in careers. And you mentioned curiosity, humbleness, and this kind of team spirit, team player attitude. Do you feel that these soft skills, you're born with them, or you can train or teach yourself to gain those to become a better sommelier? Finally,
I think some of them you can learn, some are techniques, like learning techniques, for example. But a big part would be how were you brought up? What kind of philosophy do you have in life? How do you see yourself interacting with people in general, be it suppliers, be it customers or guests, be it your team? And I think those are things you can work on. But in general, I think you're absolutely right. We need to speak about that more. For example, when people train for competition or an exam, they usually focus on tasting, theory, service, because that's what's expected of them. But I think especially when you come to high stress situations like a public final, or if you have exam anxiety, any exam will have that effect on you. It's so important to also focus on, to me, the fourth pillar, which is like mental preparation. Something I can never speak and pronounce, but what helped me a lot was sports psychology. So the psychology people use.
So basically Olympics training. That okay.
And that's what you mentioned, Olympics. I had a chance to speak to some people that took part in the Winter Olympics. So basically they're training 4 years for 25 seconds downhill. So they have huge mental pressure just before that 25 seconds.
That moment,
And there's a lot of techniques they use which you can use for any kind of stress situation. And I noticed that when I was learning some of those techniques, that helped me not only in exams and competitions, but also on a Saturday night service. When you open the door to your restaurant and 50 guests walk in and all of them start ordering wine that needs decanting, and then the cork breaks and you're like, and that helped a lot.
I remember, I think it was at the first bootcamp that we did in Poland that you spoke about this kind of mental preparation for competitions, physical preparation as well, and physical shape and like health, very basic things, again, that are not mentioned when a sommelier is preparing for exams, contests, different certifications. But it's a very big part because, of course, you can learn and you can put the technical knowledge in your head and stress yourself out to remember all these details. But it's a performance act as well when you're doing the contest or examination. So what was your path for the 2019 competition? Because I remember briefly some parts of it, like you took a vacation before. So what were the steps and what were the, let's say, your tips maybe that you know now because you have experience now compared, what would you do differently on what really helped you to prepare and to be, ready mentally, physically, outside of all the wine knowledge that you had to remember?
Before I answer that, I just want to reiterate one point. You said it's a performance act in the exam or competition, and I agree with that. But to be honest, I think that's also your service at the restaurant. That's also a performance act. Because if you walk in a 3-star restaurant, you have someone who can quote all of Gilsom to you, but it's just not graceful when they walk around the room, doesn't listen to his customers. That's just as bad. So I think working on that element of tableside presence, how to interact with people, is super helpful also, not only for the competition, but for your day-to-day job. Going back to your question, I had done many competition candidates. I'd done like smaller competitions, some of which were also international, like on Adelaide or one in South Africa. But this was my first big ASI competition. I had won Best Sommelier of Germany in November 17, and I knew the World Cup was on March 19.
Mm-hmm.
So I had more or less a year to prepare. And I was super lucky that I had a lot of help. Our restaurant manager here was training for the Swiss sommelier competition at the time, so we trained each other a lot. My girlfriend probably used the Cora more often than I did, because when I came home, she would prepare flights of wine and spirits. And I had a lot of help from the German Sommelier Association, who also gave me a coach and also gave me the means to travel. So, for example, I went to Kyoto to watch the Best Sommelier of Asia Oceania as a spectator. I went to a kind of boot camp in Montreal called Somm 360. And was able to do some very specialized tastings with a spirits producer, with a beer sommelier, with other sommeliers from neighboring countries, that kind of thing. All that while working full time. So basically in that year, there was not much free time. So you need an understanding surrounding, both at work, but also in your private life. And I'm not a morning person. So when I came home after service at night, I would do the flashcards, do the theory. Tastings I tried to do in the mornings or I was doing lunch and dinner at the time. So I did them in my afternoon break usually. And service whenever I had someone who could torture me with a stopwatch in their hands. And that was my path. The mental stuff I had learned a lot already at school, because I did some, as it's called in English, I love the drama, which is when you play theater. And the one I always preferred was not learning from a script, but improvisational theater, where they give you like 3 words and you need to make a scene out of it. And during that time, I had learned how to stand on a stage, how to control your breathing when you get anxious, how to meditate, which to me was super helpful before I went into a high stress situation. And one thing that I took from that meeting with the Olympic sports people at the bootcamp in Somm 360 in Montreal was visualization. So really seeing yourself performing that exam.
Already doing it great.
Yeah.
In your mind. Okay.
And also
not visualizing you standing on the podium and receiving the medal, but rather than you doing the actual
in that venue. So finding pictures of that venue, looking at other competitions. How are the judges going to sit there? How's the maître d' who's guiding you from table to table going to behave? Making sure whenever I trained wearing the same stuff I would in the competition, having my waiter's knife and my pen always at the same position. And then also the services leading up to that, like serving in the same order you would in a competition in your everyday job, wiping the lip of the bottle in your everyday job, to like just becoming that as a second habit or getting
I had
that.
a very fun anecdote. I don't feel it's very appropriate, but I like the story because in my not someone like outside of the sommelier profession, I had this, I don't know, it's like a very stupid thing that I did. When you pour and you have little drop on the neck of the bottle, I used to lick it because between friends, no, I mean, it's not at the restaurant or service, but it was such a natural thing that you either use your finger or you lick it because it's nice wine, it's nice drop, like you're not gonna spoil it. And I got so used to do that. And when I was on the stage at a competition in Kazakhstan, the only thing I was very focused about is not licking the bottle. That was the only, because you are so used to in stressful situation, you can revert to your very basic settings. So whatever you do, from day to day in your job, in a very stressful, high stress situation, you're gonna revert to the settings of doing. So whatever you're already doing correctly in a restaurant, in a service, in a stressful situation, you're gonna come back to. And if you are prepared, as you said, with the right placement of your pan, of your corkscrew, you're gonna do all right because you already know what you're gonna do. But some people don't see it like this, and they try to not complicate, but they see it as an upgrade of their performance. But it's always a stress. It's always gonna be a question they're not ready to answer, a bottle they don't know where to find or how to serve. That's gonna revert them to this very like basic, their everyday settings, which I don't think a lot of people realize it's gonna happen.
And I think it's also important to understand it works both ways. And I'll give you 2 anecdotes for that. One is when I was walking on the stage for the finals in Antwerp, there were a lot of people sitting in the audience, I think 1,100 or something. There were a lot of, to me, very intimidating judges, because there were... Yeah, she's a great example, because I hadn't picked up that she was part of the jury, or her husband, who's the chief restaurant critic of the London Times, Nick Lander. And then when Jancis puts down the wine for me to blind test, I'm like, wow, it's Mrs. Robinson. What's she doing here? Oh, she's going to test me. Oh, no, that's not good. And there were a lot of also best sommeliers of the world. And in my mind, I was trying to project myself to the restaurant in Zurich that I worked at, to Pavillon, trying to ignore the audience, trying to say, okay, these are all guests I know by name. There's some regulars. It's a busy night, so I need to hurry up, but I'll manage. Actually, there's a moment also caught on video where the host asks me, like, can you see the audience? And I tell them, no, to be honest, I'm trying to get them out of my focus. And he looks at me like, that's not very polite. I was like, yeah, but that's what I'm trying to do. And also, I think people always think that when they're in an exam or competition, they need to do things differently. And when you have a table that's uptight, you try to get them feeling at ease. And what always freaked me out in competitions is because it's all scripted, what the jury can say to candidates.
They don't talk to you.
They don't talk to you, and they don't respond to questions. So I was like always trying to solve that. And that worked, for example, in the semifinals. There was Michel Chantôme, Arvid Rosengren, Serge Dupes, all of those on the table, and they were ordering some Chardonnay from Argentina. It was a super tense. You could hear a needle drop in that room. And I was like, how do I diffuse this situation? And I looked at Arvid, knowing he had won in Mendoza. I was like, I think you've been to Argentina before, so I know. And I knew all of them had been, so all of them started smiling. They still didn't answer.
But just, it was a different setting, yeah.
And it made me feel at ease. It didn't get me any points, but it just made the situation feel more human. And I think that's something you can always do.
No, that's actually great. When you look at this perspective, I think the job of the sommelier is not only the technical wine knowledge, the competitions, maybe exams are very still focused on the technical knowledge, but the competitions and the work are way more broader than the knowledge of very particular wines and appellations, which you still need to know. Like, it's not excluded. But I think your example and your sharing and you speaking to the younger sommeliers specifically about how to prepare yourself mentally and physically for it brings a lot of value and brings a lot of practical advice for them, because it's never mentioned, which is sad. Like, it's not in any wine course or in any preparation. It's very neglected, and then somebody can have a breakdown or be very disappointed because nobody prepared, nobody told them that this is a very big part of their life as well. And speaking about appellations, because I could not use this moment of us being, because this is recorded in Zurich in Switzerland, and Marc kindly did a very generous, very exciting tasting of Swiss wine for a group of diploma and wine academic students, because Switzerland, I feel, is a bit neglected, and we mentioned the tastings, well, it's taken out of the WSET diploma book because it's not considered internationally maybe important. But I still feel it's a fascinating region, and it's gaining, especially with the climate change and all of this uncertainty. Will some regions be still able to produce wines in 20 years, whereas Switzerland can boast this like high altitude vineyards, a different climate for sure. In mindset of a lot of people, even wine professionals, as I myself consider, there are the stereotypes of Swiss wine either being very expensive or not so great. So this price quality ratio is not ideal. But what's your take on this? What would you say? I know you would disagree with that, but how would you then explain that it's not actually very expensive in that wine?
I mean, first of all, I understand why the wine world doesn't look at Swiss wine, because we drink it all here. We export less than 1% of the already very small production. So on the big scope of things, it doesn't make sense to spend as much time as you would on Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc or discussing Chasselas, for one example. I think what is worth looking at Swiss wine is the immense diversity. It's about 15,000 hectares, but 250 grapes, 2,500 grape growers. So there's a lot of different styles out there, a lot of micro production, and most of it is handcrafted, because if you look at the steep Swiss vineyards, there's next to nothing that you can mechanize except for very few exceptions. Because we have the Alps going through the middle of the country, we have very many different climate zones, very many different terroirs, and you have very quick changes of climates, altitudes, terroirs, all of that. So there's a lot to discover on literally in a day's car ride, you could say, because it's quite easy to get around Switzerland. Although I would recommend doing it by train. It's more fun and very scenic.
More sustainable as well.
Yes, and James Bond already did too. And I think, of course, Switzerland in general is an expensive country. Like when I go out and have a pizza and we have 2 glasses of wine, we're out €100, which is very different to my home in Germany or, of course, in Italy itself. But the wages are adapted. So, of course, in a country where everything has high labor intensity in the vineyard and high labor costs, the entry level will be expensive. It's very difficult to get any decent Swiss wine under 20 francs, which is like 19 euros roughly. But there are very few wines that cost more than 100 francs. You could probably count them on 2 hands. And already for 30 to 60 francs, something like 28 to 55 euros, let's say, you get really outstanding Syrahs, Chardonnays, Pinots, plus what I think all sommeliers love, a lot of indigenous grapes, like Completa, like Riesling, like Cornana, like Petit Hermine or Armigne, and how they're all called. I mean, there's a reason why the co-author of Grapes is a Swiss guy, Dr. José Guillermo. We just have this huge diversity of grapes. And that's why I think it's worth looking into it, especially not only Swiss Pinot and Chardonnay, but Burgundy sadly has become very expensive. And of course, in Burgundy, you still find fairly priced pockets like Maconnais. But many great Pinot and Chardonnay producers, like some parts of Germany, some parts of Austria, some parts of Switzerland, of course overseas too, now have a chance to enter the market that was so far completely dominated by Burgundy.
Are there any recognizable wine styles? For example, when you say Chablis, you expect, this crispy white, or would say Bordeaux is a, like blend of reds that are usually aged in oak for prolonged periods of time. Is there something similar to that in Switzerland?
Well, as we're recording this, we're sipping on the Chasselas, which is our signature grape, and outside of Switzerland, it only grows in small amounts in Alsace, Puy-sur-Loire, and Markgräflerland and Baden, Germany, except for 1 or 2 exceptions. And I think our Chasselas are quite light, not too aromatic, often have a lactic tone, but are very versatile. Pinot is quite a big thing. It's the main red wine grape. In general, our Pinots tend to be a bit more fruit forward than most international expressions. If they come from Grison, which is the best Pinot region in the east of Switzerland, they tend to have a slight smokiness. But you get all styles of Pinot across the country. In Ticino, so in the south, you would have a lot of Merlot. They're trying to make a Pomerol style, but of course it's a different area. In the most grown and drunk grape in this part of Switzerland, so German-speaking Switzerland, is Riesling Silvaner, also known as Müller-Thurgau, which is very easy, quaffable aperitif for summer. And in the west, except for Chasselas, you have Vaud, which is the quarter of all production. You have Valais, a canton which makes a third of all Swiss wine, but the Valais itself, I think, has 80 or 90 grapes.
Wow.
It's on the Rhone River, so you get good Syrah, of course, cheaper than a Côte Rôtie or Hermitage. But you get everything else too. All those indigenous grapes, Switzerland is known for, most of them come from Valais. We also have some Rosé in Neuchâtel and Œil de Perdrix made from Pinot. 1 or 2 other specials, like I always smile in exams. I'm always asked about Dôle, which is an old blend of Pinot and Gamay. To be honest, no Swiss person under 70 still drinks Dôle. But it comes up in every international exam simply because how are they going to keep up with what's happening in Switzerland if we don't export it?
Yeah, but generally, how would you recommend to select a Swiss wine? Do you focus on the region or on the variety? Like if I want, for example, Pinot Noir, I should be looking at specific regions. Is this the logic, more or less?
I think to get a good overview, there's a list called Mémoires de vin suisse, so the memories of Swiss wine in French. And it's a list of, I have to check, 80, 90, 100, something like that, wines, not producers. Because for each region, they looked at what is one of the most iconic producers for the grape that's typical for this region. So that list gives you good orientation if you want to say, okay, I want to get to know 3, 4, 5 different Merlots for Ticino in different styles. This list will be a good orientation of a high quality. And that's a good place to start. Of course, there are some easy answers, like for Ticino, you have to try Merlot. For Grison or Graubugne, you have to try Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. For Neuchâtel, if you're into Rosé, you have to try Œil de Perdrix. For Vaud, you have to try Chasselas, preferably from one of the famous sites like Dézalé. And for Valais, basically it's your pick. I would definitely go for Syrah, simply because I love Syrah. And I think it's logic to taste yourself up the Rhone River. But all those indigenous grapes are wet.
Are there any iconic producers, like the 3 must-tries from Switzerland?
It depends on your perspective. If you're into Burgundy styles, like Pinot and Chardonnay, the 2 go-to producers would be Gantenbein from Flesch and Grison, which is the first to put Swiss wine on the international map. The second would be Martin Donat, located in Malanz, which is very close to Flesch, who's like the young gun up and coming. And he makes excellent Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays. Recently, we had a lot of attention from Marie-Thérèse Chapaz. She's a winemaker located in the Valais, working biodynamically. And she got so much attention because in Switzerland, she's always been famous and her wines have always been great. But last year, she was the first Swiss wine producer to get 100 Parker points for white wine. For sweet wine. And actually, of that sweet wine, she only produced 54 bottles. And all of them have been sold out when they got the 100 Parker points already. And she's a very humble person, very interesting lady to talk to, if you speak French, because she only speaks French. But she's probably one of the most iconic from Valais. But you could name a lot from Valais or Vaux simply because they have the highest concentration of vineyards there.
Obviously. You mentioned before that it's like easy to drive around, to travel by train in Switzerland. Do you feel, though it's not maybe the most famous wine producing countries, that wine tourism does exist in Switzerland? Maybe some wine events on open cellar doors or like activity around the local wine production?
I mean, there are a couple of answers here. One, if you want to have laugh, go on YouTube and enter Swiss adverts or Swiss promotion, and then either Anne Hathaway or Robert De Niro or Trevor Noah, the host from The Daily Show.
Yeah.
The Swiss tourism organization did really, really funny sketches with Roger Federer, our famous tennis player, with those 3 famous actors about the Grand Tour de Switzerland. And the Grand Tour de Switzerland has been where, if you were educated in the UK in the early 20th century, you would be sent to Switzerland and do this tour. And it's a mix of mountains, vineyards, beautiful lakes, museums. There's a book from Mark Twain who covers part of this. A Tramp Abroad is the book. And many of those spots are in famous vineyards. And there's always this red thing.
So you're kind of forced to visit the vineyard.
Like my dad will do that tour this summer in his summer holiday with 70 years now, because it's just a good way to discover Switzerland and you see all parts of the culture, from cheese to wine. But if you really want to focus on wine, each year in August, we have a big fair here in Zurich organized by the Swiss Wine Promotion, where most of the high quality producers come and show their wines. And then in the 1st of May in German-speaking Switzerland, and usually about 2 weeks later in the French-speaking Switzerland, we have the open cellar days, where they open their wine cellars to the public, put on a grill, get some music, you get a tour of the winery, and that's fun both as a wine professional, but also as a private wine lover.
Great. I think there might be some motivated people to come and discover the wine side of Switzerland. Thank you so much for doing this and for your time. It's been really, I think, educational as well on the Swiss wine part, and very enlightening on your approach of the context of the sommelier and sommelier profession. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sanja, for coming to Zurich, and I hope you enjoyed the Chassler.
Oh, I did. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did enjoy recording it with Marc, and I really want to thank you for finding the time and also sharing the knowledge and the tips and little tricks with us. And if you are a sommelier preparing for competitions or maybe just sitting an exam or certification soon, I really hope that that was useful for you and you have learned a thing or two from it. And I did for sure, and it was really exciting for me on top of it to taste some of the Swiss wines. It would mean a lot to me if you would find a possibility and time to rate and review the podcast or this episode in particular on whatever platform you are listening to it on, because then it makes it easier and more accessible to share with other people and also get the attention it deserves. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.